Hello everyone, this is Stephen Hankins with Magpie Materials. Wanted to shoot a video for you today talking about some tips and tricks on tying parachutes. I know a lot of people have some difficulty with them. Some vice companies make a gallows tool to assist you in the construction. I want to tell you, you don't need any extra modifications to your vise. You don't need any contraptions to help you tie it. It just takes a little bit of practice and a couple of tips and tricks. So I'm going to help you with that. I'm also going to talk to you about some of the qualities of biots, in particular turkey biots for tying dry flies. So we'll get started by securing a Maruto D24 BL size 12 in our hook. You can use whatever hook you want. I'm also using Danville 70 denier waxed. So the way that I prefer to build a parachute post is I like to so I'm using poly here. There's several options. The more traditional materials for parachute posts would be turkey flats or T-base, white calf tail, CDC. There's several options for you. I tend to just go with poly, partly because it's cheap. You can tie a bunch of flies from a package of poly and it dries easily. I think that that's my preferred thing, is that it dries easily. So a lot of people like to build their post by wrapping it from underneath the hook. A lot of people do an X-wrap across the top of the hook, spinner wing style. I find it easiest, and it works out best for my tying, just to simply lay it lengthwise along the hook shank. Okay, what this does is it cuts out a couple steps. It's very secure, and also it orients the length of the wing, the width of the wing along with the length of the body. So I'll show you what I mean as I tie it. So I put a couple securing wraps in. I'm going to put a couple more, usually 3 to 4 wraps to secure most materials. So the next step is to stand up both sides of the post. And what you want to do now is to put 1, 2, about 3 wraps in front, the same in back, 1, 2, 3. So what this does is it starts to stand up both sides of the poly, and it begins strengthening the parachute post. So next step is to put 1, and this is where, if you're going to mess up in constructing a parachute, this is where it's going to happen. So put 1 firm but not too much pressure wrap, 2, and then here's a little trick. So once you've made that second or third wrap, you can actually pull the thread tight, and that essentially buries the thread and locks it into those fibers. Okay, so that gives you an easier time as you continue to wrap up the post. And as you can see, I'm not even using my other hand to do this. It just takes some practice and really knowing how much pressure to not use right now, because most people put too much pressure on and then they pull their thread off of the poly. So, and then the number of wraps depends on how much hackle you want. If you want a sparser hackle, use less wraps. If you want a thicker hackle, use more wraps up and down that poly as you construct the parachute base. So I've gone back down with my thread to the hook shank. Now what we want to do is spin or bobbin for thread management. You always need to be conscious of thread management. So I'm going to put a few more thread wraps behind. Charlie Craven's term for this is a thread dam. I'm going to put a few more thread wraps in front, right up against that. As you can see, I've jammed those wraps right up against. And what we've done by doing that is we've locked that post base on either side. So that's essentially locked in. So that created a very durable platform on which to wrap our hackle. It's a very durable fly. Okay, so next part what we want to do is to create a taper for our body, and we do that with thread in this case, because in using a wild turkey or any biots, you can't build up a taper with it. Unlike dubbing, you can control the amount of dubbing that you use to create a taper, but with a biot or a quill, you have to use it with thread wraps. So as you can see, I've gone back and forth and made a nice little taper. Now I'm going to tie in the tail. For the tail, I am using Whiting CDL saddle in dyed dun. It's one of my favorites. You can see the nice sort of modeling and color in that. So what we want to do now, it's a size 12, so I'm going to use a fairly thick tail. I'm not going to count those, but you can see how much I've selected for this. Now here's another little trick. You need to learn this. You need to strip the stem away from the barbs. Don't strip the barbs away from the stem. So you grab all the barbs tightly and then just yank that stem away. And in doing that, you've made all the tips of those barbs about the same length, okay? So snip off the scraggly butt ends, and now we will tie in our tail. So again, thread management, I've just spun my bobbin counterclockwise, and that flattens out the thread. We do that because if you don't, you're going to have a harder time controlling your thread. The thread will jump to the rear or to my left if you don't. That just gives it that'll jump to the right. So you twist the bobbin, you spin the bobbin counterclockwise to make your thread either not jump at all or jump back to the left where you're tying in your material, okay? So now select however much length you want for your tail. Usually about a body length. Spinners and some duns, have a much longer tail than that, but in general, a body length is okay. Okay, now I'm gonna select a biot. In this case, I'm going to use a Magpie Materials, naturally, brown drake color biot. So one thing to know about biots is the longer biots are always going to be, let me zoom out a bit. The longer biots are always going to be in the center of the biot strip. Okay, shorter biots are always going to be on the ends. Well, this one I've used quite a bit, so there's really none of the short ones on the front. But at the base of this, there's plenty of nice short little biots for smaller flies. So anyways, this is a pretty sizable fly. As you can see, turkey biots can be pretty long, sometimes as long as a Polish peacock quill. Pretty long enough to tie just about any of your mayfly bodies. Danicas, Hex, sometimes you might need to use 2 if you're trying to match those really big mayflies, but in general, a nice turkey biot of that length will cover you. Okay, so here's another couple little tricks. So if your poly material gets in the way, you can twist and pull it towards the eye to get it out of your way. Okay, now the X wrap. If you tie in a biot in the normal manner along the length of the hook, you actually form a crease in the biot with the first wrap. So what I mean by that is that's the normal manner of tying in, and To do that, you have to form a crease to make that very first wrap. Okay, we don't want to do that because that is making a weak point in the biot. So the way to counteract that is to do an X wrap. So one wrap across towards the eye, another between the tip of the hook shank, or the hook shank and the tip of the biot, and back over, creating an X wrap. And as you can see, that pulled the biot in the plane of the first wrap. So that eliminates the crease being formed as you make the first wrap of the biot. So let's move our thread back to the base of the post. Actually, I'm going to add a little bit more taper there. Okay, now the next step is super glue. You don't have to glue. I'm not sure how big of a difference it makes. I've had lots of glue brands that didn't seem to stick, and those are some of the major glue brands that most of you use. Here now I'm using DAP Rapid Fuse. So you don't want much. If you get too much on your thread, it'll essentially ooze out between the wraps of the biot. Okay, and that's just going to make kind of an uglier fly. Okay, so we have a little bit of glue on our thread. Now we're going to take an English style hackle plier. It's the best tool you can use for wrapping a biot. Begin making wraps, overlapping turns. I like to tie my biots with the rib side showing. It's just completely up to you. I'll show you why I like to do that. It gives a really neat effect. Also, with your biots, you can make tighter spaced wraps or looser spaced wraps, depending on the length of the hook and the effect you want. So with these tighter wraps, you essentially make a darker fly. Wild turkey biots have a natural barring, which creates that little black variegation, as you can see in the body that I've wrapped. So I'm gonna tie it right up against that parachute post base. 1, 2 wraps. Careful not to cut your thread at that point. So now I'm just going to clean up. Okay, now pull your parachute back into place. So there we have our body. Once you get going on these patterns, you can really bang out, a dozen in no time, hour and 15 minutes. But I'm trying to talk to you about some techniques here. So a dubbed thorax. I'm using Magpie Materials dyed brown beaver dubbing for this. Normally I would use a little bit of wax, but since it's such a small area to dub, also this beaver dubbing is so fine and light, you really don't need any wax. It just goes on your thread effortlessly. Okay. Okay, now we're just essentially gonna clean up our work, cover up our thread wraps with that dubbing. We have a little thorax on the back. Now we attach our hackle. To do that, first we want to prepare the hackle. And to prepare the hackle, and as you can see, I'm using this lovely dyed dark gray dun, or not dyed, but natural dark dun. It has that very nice speckling in it. So anyways, you want to strip some barbs from the base. Okay. And I'm going to tie, at this point you need to be thinking if you want color up or color down. I'm going to tie it with color down. So that's the shiny side facing me. Okay. And so we're going to situate our hackle in like that when we tie it in. And that means that this side of the hackle is going to go first. That's going to wrap first. So we want to strip a few more barbs off from that leading edge. Okay, not many, just enough to clean that side of the rachis as we wrap. Okay, so now we tie in, and you want your barbs, where the barbs start, even with the top of that thread base. Okay, now cinch that all down securely, and now we will dub the front side of the base, the parachute base. Okay, again, not much dubbing at all. In fact, that might be too much. Also, at this point, we need to do a little thread management. So we will spin our bobbin counterclockwise, and that gives us thread control. If you don't do that periodically throughout a tie, you could weaken your thread and you just lose control of your thread because it wants to jump to the front or to my right. Okay, now we will cover up our thread work with the dubbing, work back to the base of the parachute post. I'm going to add just a wisp more of dubbing. Okay, just kind of clean up in there. Okay, now the way that I tie a parachute, you have to end your thread, you have to leave your thread on the back side of the parachute base, just like I've done there, and I'll show you why. We're going to invert our hook, or flip our hook technically. So as you can see, the thread, the bobbin is freely hanging from the base of the parachute because we left off right here. Okay, so now what we want to do is bind the bare rachis to the parachute base. Okay, and we're just going to work up. I think I'm going to make it just a little bit longer for a little bit more room to work and another turn of hackle. All right, so we've gone up and we're going to go back down or to my left and end the thread there. Okay, now I will get my bobbin out of the way, and here's the magic of a dry fly. Okay, so as you can see, that stem is nice and flexible. At this point too, if I wanted to tie color up, I could do that. I would just rotate it around like that, and that has oriented us to tie color up. To tie color down, you would do just the opposite. Rotate that way, and the color side is facing the vise. Okay, first wrap, nearly touching turns or just the slightest gap between the turns, moving back down. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5 wraps of hackle, or 4.5. Now we're going to tie the hackle off onto the base of the parachute. So 1, 2, 3 wraps. Sneaker scissors in closely and snip out. Okay, now we're going to hand whip finish right there. So four turn whip finish. Find our bodkin and seat the knot. Pull it tightly, get it snug. Clip out the thread. Now what we'll do is we'll cut the excess post material out, and there we have it. We have one hackle bar. We're just going to snip out of there. Okay, there we have a parachute brown drake. It's a good little pattern. Those bugs should be going off any day now, southern Colorado. Actually have a few barbs that got a little wacky. I'm just gonna snip those out. So there we have it. That's a good durable parachute. It won't come undone. If you want, I wouldn't say that it's necessary, but a little varnish or Sally Hansen's or whatever you use on that whip finish is good. I've fished them a lot without it just to see, and I've not had them come undone. But so I just have a drop of head cement on the tip of a bodkin, and I'm just gonna gently apply it right to those thread wraps. So there we have it. Parachute 101. I recommend you sit down and practice at it if you're having trouble. I refer to this video. There's lots of other good videos out there, but I just want to add some educational pieces to the Magpie Materials website, and hopefully this helps you out.